Are we ready?
Yeah, good to go.
Yeah, good. I don't think there's anyone waiting in the lobby anymore.
Okay.
You've admitted Philip.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in, thanks.
Wonderful.
Okay. Good morning. Right, we'll start. I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. A special welcome to our friends across the water from Cornwall Council, RCHT and CST. And a welcome to the press who's sitting beside me. And and anybody who's listening in from the public. I have apologies from Kate Shields. I'd like to take a roll call now so I know exactly who's here. So if you'd just like to say present or something when I call your name, that'd be fine. Councillor Sims. Councillor Legg.
Yes, present.
Councillor Marcus.
Present.
Councillor Nellams. Councillor Smith. He's going to be late. Councillor Watt.
Present.
Councillor Williams. Paul Charnock.
Present.
Thank you. Phil Confu.
Yep, present, thank you.
Tracy Langley. Neil
Tracy will be...
She'll be joining later.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Neil Hamilton. Jason Kahn. Holly Sykes. Paul Masters.
Present.
Yes. Ashling Khan.
Present.
Nicholas Stinson.
Present.
Tom Walton.
Present.
And Bob Dawson.
Present.
Russell Ashman. Stephen Taylor.
Present, Chairman.
I imagine not Simon Mansell then. And Andy Thomas. Present.
Present.
Right, thank you very much, everybody.
So as far as members are concerned, Chairman, there's yourself, Councillors Legg, Marcus and Watt.
And Jonathan Smith is here now.
Yeah, present.
So there's Councillor Sims and Councillor Nellam still to join us.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think Councillor Nellams might be away, and I think Councillor Williams might be away as well. Not sure. I haven't had any apologies.
We are for it.
Yes, thank you very much. After each presentation of each agenda item, we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if members would like to make notes of the questions they would like to ask, I think that's the best way to do it, like we do in full council. But if you could keep your mute buttons on unless you're going to speak, would be appreciated. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Of the minutes of the last meeting. The minutes from the meeting in October. No, I'm sorry, not the minutes in October. In July. Are there any questions for the minutes in July? Could I have a proposer, please?
Yeah, I'll propose those minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Could I have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. And we'll take silence as an agreement on all the agenda items, all the recommendations. So anybody against? Right, that's okay. Thank you very much. There are no urgent items. So we come to part 1, agenda item 4, which is Brilliant Together. and I would like to ask our officer, Bob Dawson, to present this paper.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll take the report and appendix as read, because it is a report from an external organisation, or two, in fact. Would just like to provide some clarification regarding recommendation 2 on the council cover report for this item. This is on page 11 of the online report pack. The implied recommendations 2A and 2B, as per our chair's briefing yesterday, may be misleading. These are simply illustrating the recommendations from the providers. Recommendation 2 is therefore just the initial paragraph that members satisfy themselves that appropriate assurance has been provided in respect to the 2 recommendations presented to the Scrutiny Committee by the providers. Members are also reminded that full council supported the direction of travel regarding the proposed integration at its meeting of the 10th of September, and members may wish to refer to that resolution during their debate, having considered the strategic case and further supporting evidence. So I'm delighted to hand over now to Mr. Compue, CEO of the Cornwall Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, it's Phil Compue here. So what we're looking to do is really for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, as the NHS changes its structure and we move to more integrated health and care systems through the integrated care system, there seems little point in having sort of several trusts providing services across the patch. And what we've come to is, a couple of years ago, we were at sort of 3 organisations, with Peninsula Community Health being a provider, and CFT and RCHT. We've in a sense merged CFT and Peninsula Community Health in 2015. We're now looking to move to the next step of that to create one integrated provider. It will logistically make things much easier for us, particularly on Scilly, where in essence we have the midwives who work for one organisation and the rest of the hospital staff who work for another organisation. And we want to overcome some of those barriers and create just one NHS service that we deliver for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And really, we're just looking for your support for us to take it to the next level. We will submit a strategic outline case to the regional office, and then if they approve that there, we will produce a full business case. And I would expect that full business case will need to come to Scilly. There will be public consultation on this from January onwards of next year, 2021. So there will be further opportunities to discuss this, and then we'd be looking to bring a full business case back to you later next year when that's been drafted before that's submitted to a region. So you're not, in essence, signing yourself in blood now. What we're looking for is a commitment from you that you support the idea of the direction of travel and are prepared to support that going forward, subject to receiving the full business case. But happy to take any questions.
I'd just like to say I personally support the merger. Bringing everything together under one roof, I think, is common sense. But the Isles of Scilly must be, of course, our prime concern. The stretch of water between the islands and Cornwall can cause us quite a lot of problems sometimes. I'd like to ask you that you will keep the Isles of Scilly in mind all the time, and especially the stretch of water, which causes problems with people going to access appointments on the mainland. We have an excellent health centre and small hospital here, but it's when people have to go to the mainland which can cause a lot of problems. And I'd like you to be able to keep that in mind in everything that you do in the business case. Thank you.
And we will do. And I think the opportunity that we're looking towards in terms of rebuilding the hospital and the care home to create an integrated provision within one organisation will mean we'll be able to look at technology, but it'll also be easier for staff, for example, from the hospital to book appointments over on the mainland if necessary, because quite often it's also the timing of the bookings that they're not very sympathetic in terms of travel, and people end up having to stay overnight when they really want to get back to the island. If we can bring all of that together, we'll be able to overcome some of the artificial boundaries that we've got there.
Right, thank you. I think Aisling Khan has raised her hand. Is that correct?
Yeah, just to talk about the engagement. So I've got a call in with Caroline Wrighton shortly to work out how that's going to look on Scilly. obviously, if we can do face-to-face, that would be very helpful. I think Paul Charnock's on the call, if Healthwatch could assist in terms of publicising the event and making sure that patient voice is at the heart of all this, that would be very useful. I think also an aspect of this is the Haven project, which is a charitable project, and how that fits into Kate and Phil's plans moving forward and the use of the estate at RCHT.
Thank you, Aisling. Right, I'll go round everybody. Councillor Sims, have you joined us? Councillor Legg, have you any questions, please?
Thank you. This obviously seems very logical to me. It seems to make a lot of sense. Could this lead to providing more services on island? I'm just thinking, you mentioned midwifery. Could it lead to providing scans on island? Is that something that routinely people have to go away for? I realise there may be technical aspects to that which you may not be able to answer, but in theory.
There will be some technical aspects. There's always the technical and the professional bits about the staffing to run the scans, but there's an opportunity to look at more services, and that's what we'll be doing. Almost irrespective of this, we'll do that through the hospital redevelopment plan and look at what we can provide and what we can do. And I think, as you say, a lot of this is common sense. And to most members of the public, they think it is one NHS. The trusts and all the shenanigans we have behind that have been an artificial construct that we've created in the last 20 years that probably haven't helped. I think if it's one organisation, it will be easier to redeploy staff and resources out to the islands to deliver some of those services in a timely way. It'll also encourage, I think, more of the technology and the more of the use of the video technology and remote scanning is hopefully where we'd want to get to on Scilly if we can get the right equipment into the new hospital.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. I don't really have anything more to say on this. It seems to be about taking down barriers rather than putting anything up. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Legg. Councillor Marcus, have you any questions?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this does seem to be going, my cynical end, full circle from 20, 30 years ago, but that's the nature of local government, I think. Just one question about governance. Is the proposed new body, that's still going to be answerable to the health scrutiny function of the council? I'm just wondering about how that works in the future and making sure that the new body is accountable to the public here on the Scilly.
The new body will remain as an NHS Foundation Trust and will be accountable to Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the island. So we will still be accountable to you. And I think, again, part of the positive at the moment is because we're working on the rebuild for the hospital and the care home together. That will help to keep Scilly front and centre in everybody's thinking in terms of some of the work that's going on. But in terms of accountability, it will report into Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It will still have to report to you. It's not moving it outside of NHS constructs.
Okay. And that was going to be my next question, is about the integration project of the hospital here. Was just how this would help or affect or maybe streamline that project in terms of, one of the big risks that was outlined was about staffing and the issues around pay and all that stuff. So this project, I imagine, would help that.
So this project helps to strengthen that because we've got a larger staff base to pull upon to bring people over to Scilly, and also strengthens the base for the Health and Care Academy and the training of staff locally. So we know that we've already got one nurse, healthcare assistant that's training as a nurse on Scilly, and we'd look to increase that because I think for us, I think that's really the best way that we're going to get healthcare professionals on Scilly is to get people locally, and particularly the youngsters, to want to train as those healthcare professionals and remain on Scilly. We can try to import, and we've got some really good examples at the hospital of people who have moved to Scilly and love it and married locally and stayed. I think the best route for us will be about local training, and a larger health care academy across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly will strengthen that and give us some of the economies of scale to make it viable.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Phil.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillor Nellums, has he joined us? Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chairman. Like fellow councillors, I think this seems like a logical move. I guess the question from residents would be around whether this ultimately provides, better, the same, or worse services than we currently get, and right from A&E through to community level. So I guess that would be the main concern from residents.
So our goal in the Scrutiny case is that it should make things better. If it's not making it better, we've missed the point of doing the whole exercise. So my hope is, and my belief is that we're doing it to make it better. Yeah. But obviously, part of Scrutiny's role is to make sure we do that. And I think the key, again, the key for me with Silly is because a combined organisation running the hospital will give you much better access to a much broader range of services there, rather than just coming from one trust or the other.
Yeah, of course. I think another area of interest, like Councillor Legg just touched on, is around bringing more services to Silly or doing them remotely. And we heard from Healthwatch in a recent meeting how there's been quite a big uptake in remote services accessed via St Mary's Hospital or from home, which was really, really encouraging. I think that's certainly from my hat on with a climate emergency lead. I think it's really, really important that we try and reduce travel. And obviously there's a big cash saving as well there, isn't there? And just a lot more convenient for people. So very keen to see that progress.
Yeah, and the use of Attend Anywhere and some of that technology we're hoping will remain post-COVID, that people will get used to it, and will just in simple sustainability arguments you're highlighting there is much better for the environment if we can encourage people to do that. And the outcome is the same, and most people get frustrated particularly if they're called to an outpatient's appointment just to be told everything's fine and go away again. There are much easier ways.
I think we've all been there, yes. From Silly, yeah. And just lastly, where you touched on COVID, I mean, is the progress of this work likely to be negatively affected by COVID, or is it sort of carrying on roughly on schedule?
No, carry on schedule. I think as Aisling was highlighting, our tricky bit at the moment is we'll be doing the public consultation. We've done quite a lot of staff consultation using Teams and had sort of 700, 800 staff at a time log in and be briefed and be able to ask questions. What we've got to do is work out, as we go into January, February, how we might consult better with the public. If we can't get face-to-face meetings, then we'll need to think about Teams and technology, how we can take that through.
Yeah, very good. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't normally approve large mergers, such as the idea of a Greater South West Regional Council as just one example. But I think that this makes really common sense, as the Chairman mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, and I would certainly support the recommendations on paper. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it is common sense, but we're not to do that. And I think as one of your colleagues highlighted before, in 1986 when I trained as a nurse, it feels like that's how the NHS was, and there is a bit of going back to where we were, but it will help to make things easier if we're one organisation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. I see Councillor Sims has joined us. Good morning, Steve. Are there any questions you would like to ask? We're doing the integration.
I don't think anything specific. Sorry, I'm late, but the thing hadn't charged, and I thought it had, so I had to wait till it came on. No, just referring to what you said just then. Do you have any idea why this whole sort of fractured system started off in the first place? Because I know numerous people have been moaning about it for quite a long time. I mean, somebody must have liked it or thought it was a good idea once, and I just don't know who they are.
So originally it was delivered by, I'll give you the history lesson, I suppose, in sort of early 2000. It was created by Tony Blair and the Labour administration. An NHS trust, foundation trust, was seen as a bit more around the cooperative movement, and they would set up and you would get some of that coming through. We had the Lansley reforms in 2012 that thought competition was a way of resolving pressures in the NHS, and that strong trusts would take over weaker trusts, and we'd end up with market forces playing through. I think we've now got back to the point where actually the NHS isn't a market service; it's a service industry to everybody. Markets don't play a part in that. We need to deliver care and treatment to everyone, and it's much more sensible to have that unified approach. And integrated care systems are our attempt to move that back to a unified approach. But I think for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, One Trust will be key in helping make that happen as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. Right, I think if anybody, any more questions, if you'd like to put your hand up from anybody, or has everybody said their bit? Okay. Right, so we take the recommendations. Could I have a proposer for the recommendations that members note the report brilliant together, strategic case and further evidence at Appendix 1 to this report? Recommendation 2, that members satisfy themselves that appropriate assurance has been provided in respect of the 2 recommendations presented to the Scrutiny Committee by the providers. Could I have a proposer, please?
I'm happy to propose Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. A seconder, please.
Yeah, Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Councillor Legg. Is there anybody against? Take that as carried then. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thanks.
We shall look forward to the next stage.
Okay. I'll look forward to coming back then. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Right. Now go to agenda item 5, the review of the collaboration arrangements with Cornwall. And this will be presented by our Chief Executive, Paul Masters.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know, Bob, if you're able to share the slides that we circulated.
Hopefully visible now, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay. All right. So, if that's okay, member, I'll go through the slides, and then, as the chairman asked, if we could keep the questions to the end. Chairman, the reason this is before you today is obviously when I joined you as Chief Executive, a number of members were asking for a review of the collaboration agreement, and therefore that's before you today. A number of officers will be here to sort of talk particularly about the areas of service that they're responsible for, and I'd like to start pretty much by thanking them and Bob for pulling all this together despite COVID and all the pressures they're on, and also for colleagues in Cornwall Council who've had input into this as well. I suppose obviously there's always been a history of the islands working in collaboration with other councils across the country to provide services to the islands where it's appropriate to do so. And obviously this particular piece of work started back in Teo's time, when there was a sort of an issue around budget, which you'll remember on slide 2, going back to a full council minute where we were talking about saving £4 million by 2020. But there were a number of issues that came to the fore as well in terms of business continuity and service delivery. So if we can go on to slide 3, please, Bob, the justification for the arrangements. I think and many of these justifications are still valid today. The islands continue to face significant challenges in recruiting particular skills, particularly sometimes at a senior level within the salary band that it has. And I think, as you've just heard from Phil Comfew, one of the things I'm particularly interested in is how we begin to build our own on the islands in order that working for the council is seen as a career path that people would like to take part in. The issue, one of the strengths of the islands, of course, is the fact that many of our staff are multi-skilled, but sometimes business continuity can be a bit of an issue when we only have one person with particular expertise in one area, and therefore getting further support from our colleagues on the mainland has been quite successful in helping us, particularly with our business continuity issues. Obviously, whilst we remain and will always remain 2 independent councils, working alongside Cornwall Council and sharing the membership things such as Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, health authority and all those things, the LEP, the local nature partnership. All of those things mean that sometimes we share the same pressures and therefore can have the same language when we want to build capacity together. And so the collaboration agreement at its heart was not just about service delivery, but was also to build business continuity, mutual aid, and to build benefits to the community of the islands at the same time as being value for money. So on to slide 4, you'll see there's the current list of all of the various services which are either delivered in full or in part by our colleagues in Cornwall. And we're going to go through those one by one just in terms of where we think they are. Some of them will be quite light in the fact that it's all working fine, and some of them, there are areas where we're going to suggest some improvements to you today. On to slide 5, Russell, I don't know if he's joined us yet, but Russell will be joining this meeting. He's just finishing up a call at the moment, so I'm sure if there's any particular issues on charging, Russell will be able to go through those with you. But in terms of the papers today and one of the appendices, you'll see all of the charging arrangements that are in place, which range from either full cost recovery or day rates. But I'd like to point out at this point that whilst on the face of it, those charging arrangements show how much money we pay Cornwall for delivering the services, what is less easy to show is the value add we get when particularly we have access to support or wider services that in effect we don't particularly pay specifically for. And I'll come back to some of those as we go through the services. On to governance, please, Bob. The current governance arrangements, though, are one area that I'd like members to have some input into. First of all, and I do know the history, talking to many of you about how this agreement came to place, and perhaps some members feeling that they weren't involved in understanding the full scope of it. So the first thing I wanted us to have a conversation around was governance. Currently, the collaboration agreement sort of sets out the services to be provided, and within that, there are ways that things can be added or amended both by officers of your council within our own particular delegations. And the first thing I think that would be worth doing is that I really do think it's time for us to have a clear position statement that sits above the collaboration agreement, which talks very much about what benefits this brings to both parties, on what basis we're entering into this or we're not entering into it, and what we're trying to achieve by doing it. And I think that sets the context for the collaboration agreement, which then tends to get into more contractual issues. The second is delegation to officers, which are not necessarily going to be changed completely, but I do think in terms of where services are delivered outside of the islands, then I really want to give an assurance to members that those should be brought to the attention of full council. So what I'm seeking today is your support that where there are matters of substance or alteration to the services, either being changed, being deleted or being added to, they should always be discussed with full council going forward. The third is the collaboration board and the steering group. And I've always been slightly confused about these, even though I've read the terms of reference. The collaboration board, on which is chaired by the chairman of the council and has the deputy leader of Cornwall Council on it, is a forum in which shared services and delivery can be discussed. And underneath that is a steering group, which is an officer group, which is seen to be set up to talk about the sort of day-to-day running of the agreement. I think both of those groups probably are worth a review and a discussion with Scrutiny. Starting with the latter, one of the recommendations I want to move forward is that for each one of these agreements, there should be very clear performance metrics in place, and the steering group can then have a meaningful meeting where it's holding to account that performance from a value for money point of view, and that those papers should be integrated into our performance report that comes to full council. So the first is to tidy up, if you like, the performance reporting on the collaboration agreement to full council, which has not happened in a way that I think it should going forward. The third discussion about the collaboration board. I think the collaboration board absolutely is the right thing to do. It's absolutely right that elected members should have conversations with elected member leaders on the mainland, but I'm not sure whether it should be wholly focused on just disagreement. You'll understand now there's the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board that the Chair and Vice Chair sit on, which talks about sort of regional, national and local issues with our partners. And we recently held that meeting with the leader and deputy leader of Cornwall Council, and I wonder whether there should be a more regular political conversation with the political leaders on Cornwall Council, and whether this collaboration board should be morphed into that rather than just talking about service delivery. But that's for members to discuss. If we can move on to the next slide now, please, Bob, which is in terms of some of the functions then that we go through. So the first one, obviously, you'll see there is finance, covering things such as payroll, council tax, business rate, date recovery, and Oracle Cloud. I'm not sure if Tina is on the call, but if she is, I'll bring her in a second. I'm obviously responsible for this part alongside Russell as our 151 officer, and I'd like to think that you would agree with me that in terms of the delivery of the finance function to the council, I think that the delivery is absolutely satisfactory and has shown significant improvement and is still improving since I've been in position. I think Russell, as our 151 officer, and we'll come on to that particular role in a minute, does a remarkably good job for the council, but underneath him, the access to the finance team and all the specialists in it give us access to wider finance expertise that we wouldn't have just by employing our own individual staff. Is Tina on the call? Tina, are you here or not?
I don't think she is, Paul.
Okay, Bob. So there is an issue, though, with Oracle Cloud. Oracle Cloud is a piece of software that's being rolled out across Cornwall and ourselves, and there have been a number of issues in terms of Oracle Cloud, which has made it difficult, particularly with some of our HR function, in order to get the access to the information we need. I know that's being resolved with Cornwall Council, and I know Cornwall Council has got the same issues as well with its own reporting mechanism. But we are bringing to your attention that there have been implementation issues with Oracle Cloud. They continue to be the case. They are being resolved, but they're the sorts of things that I would want the performance management reporting to be very clearly showing to you members. The second area is information technology and IT, and this is all managed under the leadership of Tom. So, Tom, I'd like you to talk about how you think that's going.
Hi, Paul. Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to give an update on that. So we split it into a few different areas. So security is one area where we're very satisfied with the performance. So Cornwall Council has their own security framework. There are various protections they have in place for stopping attacks on the services, etc. And we sit on top of that. So regardless of how good our own information governance is, we've always got that sort of background layer of assurance that we're working on top of a set of very secure email and file saving systems. So we're very satisfied with that approach. There's a few slight things that we want to approach in future, but we have a business partner assigned to us where we can request improvements over time. So really happy there with the performance in terms of security. Business continuity, again, we have excellent business continuity. We've got a helpline that's available outside of hours, so you can call them, whenever you have an issue. So remote business continuity support for all of our services is excellent. Backup is excellent as well. One issue that we do have is on-island support, and that's something that I think we want to clear up going forward. There are just occasions where you have a hardware issue. Even if you have hardware you can swap out on island, it can still be difficult to get that set up and integrated, and that came into sort of sharp focus during the pandemic. So one thing we're discussing with our Cornwall colleagues is how that can work going forward, and it might be that there are ways we can sort of unlock things a little bit locally to make that easier in future. But generally speaking, it's given us some more assurance in that area. Hardware, it's difficult to say too strongly on hardware. The setup and performance is excellent. We get our devices really quickly, etc. But they are, at the end of the day, ultimately the same hardware devices that we were using previously. But they're bought in they're cheaper because they're bought in bulk, so we buy from Cornwall in that sense. The phone system's been robust, has worked well, and we're also integrating bring your own device. So if you have your own mobile phone and you want to use that for calls, you can now access emails and securely access documents, etc., from that device. And I think that will become more popular because so many more staff are working from home at present. The email system itself is good. We've got good archiving, so you can access older emails without it stressing the system. It's been pretty robust. We get the occasional slowdown on the system, which we report back to Cornwall, but generally speaking, we're very happy with that. And our general overall opinion of the way it's working is very good. Where we need software that Cornwall necessarily don't use themselves, a good example would be elections. We use election software that Cornwall don't use. We found them to be really open to us using that software. They don't put barriers in place to force us to use the same software that they're using. We are free to choose our own routes, and the business partners we've had are great. They'll talk directly to whichever provider we choose, so we're very happy with that. The only thing that I obviously can't say is, and it was beyond the scope of this paper, was to give a sort of value for money opinion. It's quite a big job, actually, to assess whether the value we get from Cornwall is better than an equivalent on the market. I'm not saying it's not. For all I know, it's the cheapest and best possible option you could get. I'm sure it is, but the report sort of stopped short of giving that absolute assurance that's true, because it's, as you can imagine, there's so many different agreements here that's a job in its own right, and ultimately, each area of the collaboration agreement will assess in its own right going forward. But that's all I have to say on that, and the comments I received back from Cornwall basically agreed on those points as well.
Thank you, Tom. I think the VFM point that Tom makes is a valid one, and I think we'll continue to look as we review the whole document going forward about whether we still consider the VFM judgment is still in place. And obviously, Russell is a very good foil in making sure that we ask the right questions on that. Aisling, would you like to just highlight any issues on fire and rescue?
So there are no issues. We've written satisfactory performance, but it's actually a really strong alliance that we have with colleagues in Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, and that's been evidenced by positive HMI inspections of both FRS services. We are discussing how we take it forward, and we won't go anywhere without coming back to you. But yeah, it's a strong partnership, and I'm coming to Scrutiny in November with some more detailed reports on all the things we've achieved together and separately.
Thank you, Aisling. And I think members will be aware, I think I've mentioned it at the informal, but there is a conversation for us to have about whether we are supportive or not of having a joint chief fire officer with Cornwall. Members will probably be aware that the post is currently filled by Mark Hewitt as an interim chief fire officer for Cornwall, and that job is currently out for advert. Julian German, the leader of Cornwall Council, has been in conversations with the chairman asking whether we wanted to sit on the interview panel, and that's not a decision that we have made yet, but it's one that the door is open if we feel it's the right thing for Scilly. So I think your views on that would be welcomed about whether you think that is something we should progress. I think from my particular point, I think my advice to you is that it is something you should consider, mainly because, as Aisling said, the increased focus from the HMI nationally is on the uniformed part of the service, and they always seem to seek, not that I'm saying Aisling isn't doing a good job, she's doing a brilliant job as the Chief Executive of the Fire Authority, but sometimes wearing a uniform and giving that operational experience is something that the HMI look at, but we'll come back to that point later. Nicola, anything on building control?
Nothing really on building control, just to say that the service is provided effectively from the mainland with visits over for inspections regularly. I think one thing that's missing perhaps is the fact that we don't get customer feedback, and that's on our shoulders, I think. So I think in all these things we can think about how we improve, and to me the bit that's missing in that part is just asking what the customer thinks to the service that's been provided. But certainly from an officer perspective, the service is well provided.
Thank you, Nicola. I've already briefly touched on 151 and monitoring officer roles. I mean, from my perspective as your chief executive, those two officers, very high caliber officers that sit on my management team, hold the authority to account and make sure that we're safe and secure and well governed in everything we do. I'm not sure that we would get officers of that caliber by just employing our own in terms of the salary levels that we would be able to offer, never mind the transportation issues and everything else. And I think what we don't see so much is the links that the 151 and the MO have, and Stephen might want to comment on this, by being able to talk directly with the wider legal teams or audit teams or finance teams that we don't see behind the scenes, that give us wider expertise and access to more information and specialist services rather than through an individual. I don't know, Stephen, if you had any comments to make on the MO role?
You're absolutely right, Paul. The issue really is that it can be a very lonely and isolated job, and the fact that there is that resource of Cornwall does make things a lot easier to discuss with, to take best practice from, as well as obviously through the colleagues in the wider country. But the link with Cornwall is helpful because there is that access to that wider pool of knowledge and practice, good practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I don't know, Russell, have you joined us yet? I'm looking at the screen and the slides, I'm afraid.
Yes, I am, Paul. I'm here.
Do you want to comment on anything, Russell?
Yeah, very similar to Steve, and definitely get a benefit of being part of information from Cornwall. We get various communications that Cornwall are signed up to, which are a benefit to the Council of the Isles of Scilly as well. Stuff that we probably wouldn't sign up to on our own because of the cost or the commitment to it, but we get that information from various organisations that Cornwall have links into, which is very useful from the financial perspective.
Okay, thank you, Russell. For obvious reasons, the Director of Public Health isn't joining us today, but Aisling may have some comments, and I do. I mean, I think that you'll have seen all the way through this period the benefit of us having a sort of joint service with the Director of Public Health on the mainland, access to the wider public health team. Obviously, there have been occasions where perhaps, understanding the particular needs of the islands have been challenging, but at the same time, if you look back at the support the Director of Public Health gave us in putting together the evacuation scheme and giving advice and guidance to the Scrutiny Committee, I have no particular issues at all with recommending that we continue in this alliance. Aisling, would you like to add anything on Director of Public Health?
Again, really strong performance. I think the role of public health within the organisation has been enhanced by what we've gone through the last 6 months. So I think the legacy of that's going to be really, really positive. We're also developing with the DPH and the whole grow your own idea locally. So we actually have got somebody employed to do a master's in public health practice. So there's some really, really positive shoots. And just to also remind you that Cornwall itself worked with Devon for a period of time before the current post holder came into place and has some shared arrangements. So again, it's just to underline the point that local authorities looking at shared arrangements is actually really good practice. It's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of strong leadership.
Thank you, Aisling. Data protection is always an interesting point. Obviously, Tom leads on this in terms of information governance. So shall I look to you, Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Again, we're really happy with this relationship. So I perform the role of the senior information risk owner on the island, but my job would be really, really difficult without that wider support from Cornwall's team. So, for example, we employ a data protection officer in Cornwall, who is Simon Mansell. Simon's also our monitoring officer. But Simon heads up a team of information governance specialists in Cornwall, and we have access on a sort of ad hoc basis when we need it for them to review risk assessments or data breaches. And data breaches is probably our best example of where we kind of just need that external support. So I see a handful of local data breaches, and I interact with the Information Commissioner's office, every so often, but they do it all the time. It's a big authority. It's the biggest unitary in the country. So they're exposed to lots and lots of different examples of breaches, some of them tiny and some of them bigger and reportable to the ICO. And that's allowed them to build up this expertise and experience of when they should escalate something and when they shouldn't, because they've been through that. They've been to the ICO, they've received comments back, and they've built up this sort of corpus of knowledge. And we're allowed to tap into that on a sort of pay-as-you-go basis for information governance purposes. And we've got that assurance of a DPO off island who's got that experience. And then on island, we have our own sort of approach to data protection. We can make our own sort of calls on whether a risk is worth taking, because you always have to balance risk against allowing people to access information and get on with their roles. And I think particularly over the last year, that balance is just about right. And I certainly wouldn't feel assured if it were to change and were to go entirely local, certainly for the time being. We are getting a lot of value from that.
Thanks, Tom. And this is an interesting one, the LADO role. Unless you sort of mainly work in people services, sometimes this is a little understood role. But Aisling, did you want to just explain that one?
Yeah, so this is a statutory officer. It's called a LADO, and it's about investigating allegations made against adults who work with children. Historically, there's been some poor recruitment practices in some of our statutory agencies, not actually the council. So a huge kind of historic backlog to deal with, and now we are able to do a lot more kind of prevention work, training and support to all our colleagues. And that's reported regularly into the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, into Ofsted, and those arrangements are hugely satisfactory. And I've spoken to Kate Evans-Hughes, and it's something we will continue to do. We do not have the workload to justify designating somebody within our local authority to do just that role.
Thanks, Aisling. And it's quite a complicated and very, very difficult role to undertake as well, having been involved in a number of LADO investigations over the years.
Absolutely.
So moving on to the next slide, I think, Aisling, you probably covered it already, but in terms of the actual SLA with the Fire and Rescue Service, that's all going well, and no particular issues you want to bring to members' attention?
No issues at all, and I'll bring a report to you all at November Scrutiny.
Yeah, we're having a special on Fire and Rescue Service and the Integrated Risk Performance Plan, etc. Nicola, anything on trading standards?
No, it's all working well. When we need them, they're there.
Okay. Legal services, Tom, in terms of access rather than the MO role, but actually into getting legal support?
Yeah, so the legal agreement we've got is really good. We get a good cost per hour out of that legal team. We also get access to the framework, which is our way of buying legal support that Cornwall can't necessarily offer, but is on the market generally, and we get good rates for that. The thing to say is, if we don't get any legal support, it doesn't cost us any money. So it's one of those good arrangements where Cornwall they've got a big legal team with lots of specialists in it, and they get a bit of extra work, which is useful for maintaining that sort of, that level of staffing. And then from our point of view, we get to tap in as and when we need it without necessarily having to commit to employing a solicitor, because solicitors they're all different. They all have their areas of expertise, and you ideally want to get a planning solicitor for planning matters, or a corporate property solicitor for those matters. And we at present we're really satisfied with that relationship. And the person heading up that legal department is our former monitoring officer, Matt Stokes. We've got a really good relationship with Matt, and he's really keen to make sure we keep getting lots of value out of that relationship. So really pleased with that at the moment.
Thank you, Tom. Public health, I won't go into because we've already discussed it. I'm sure members, you're probably thinking we might be having some duplication here. The main thing is we're trying to point out, earlier we were talking about where people in effect are authorised to act on behalf of the island, such as the monitoring officer and the 151 and the director of public health. These are actually then the service level agreements that sit underneath that in terms of the level of service that people provide. And in terms of public health, we've got no issues on that. Internal audit, I've had a conversation with members and with Holly Jason, who may be on the call, and of course, they're presenting their report to you after this item. Internal audit, I think, is still a work in progress, but the key thing on this that I think is a great advantage, and I was talking to Holly and Jason about this, is how we begin to get even more value from the internal audits that they're doing for Cornwall Council, where Cornwall Council are delivering services that we have access to. So what I mean by that is if internal audit are doing some audit work for Cornwall Council about IT or information governance, bearing in mind those services are also ones that we have access to, then sharing those recommendations and understanding the improvement journey, in effect, means that we get double bang for our bucks. So I think internal audit is improving and going in the right direction. We've got a debate on it in a minute in terms of Block 1 audit, and probably we'll go into Block 2. But I think what I'm more interested in, I know Russell might want to comment here, is in that conversation, the work that audit are doing was almost predefined before they took over the work, and what we're really quite keen to do now is to slim that down rather than skim the surface and do some real quality, in-depth audit work. Did you want to comment, Russell?
Just getting off mute. Yes, we've revised and reviewed the original plan that was put together. We want them to now target some specific areas. In particular, what we were wary of is that there was duplication in some of the work that was on the original internal audit plan, which has already been picked up by other external inspectorates, i.e. the work last year by the LGA and Ofsted and the HMI. It didn't seem worth asking our internal audit partners to go back over work that was done very recently by, as I say, external inspectors. So now we're targeting it on the stuff where we don't have external inspectors to give us the assurance that those areas are being run to a satisfactory level.
Thank you, Russell. Nearly there, members. Next slide, Bob. I mean, access to the coroner speaks for itself, really. Hopefully not a massive pressure on us, but actually a very important service in that we need a coroner at our beck and call if we need it, and that works well. Library, anything on that one, Nicola?
It works really well. It's a really good provision from Cornwall. It helps us access that service that the people on the mainland get. So I think it's a really good success story. Okay.
And Aisling, over to you for the next three in terms of fostering and peer support and challenge business support, etc.
Yeah, so as you know, we've had a long history of working with Cornwall Council around children's services, and that's an expectation of the sector and Ofsted that local authorities support each other. So Cornwall are our fostering and adoption agency, because again, we wouldn't have enough caseload to develop the skills locally to do that. That works very strongly, and through developing some local marketing campaigns, we've had our first ever foster carer on the island. Business support services, that essentially is translating social worker speak into IT speak in order to deliver our case management system, and that is very strong and very good value for money. Peer support and challenge is an arrangement in order to support our social workers in their practice and make sure that they're up to date and that we counteract a potential issue about such close partnership working on the island. So it's about getting that kind of external spotlight to make sure that we are always making robust and good decisions. But that supports me in terms of my accountability as a DCS, that I know and am assured that what we're doing is of the highest quality. And that's all been borne out by very positive Ofsted and peer challenge inspections.
Thank you, Aisling. Next slide, Bob. We're just other arrangements, just for your information. Whilst under environmental health, we've not implemented a service level agreement, we do, and actually all the way through COVID, Cornwall's environmental health team have been offering Mike and Sandy a great deal of advice and access to more specialist environmental advice, which we've been able then to spread across the islands as well as sort of the communications. There's a bit of tidying up I think we need to do around housing benefits and council tax administration in terms of just writing in the agreement exactly how it works and who does what. But you'll know all the way through such things as you'll have noticed in terms of delivering those grants at speed to the business community. That was handled by Cornwall on our behalf, and absolutely we were, straight off the blocks with that one, so that works quite well. The crisis comms thing is more linked to the local resilience forum, and I know Tom has been liaising with Helen Mason quite a lot during the COVID and getting sort of at least critical friend and peer support in terms of how to handle comms around that, and there's a member workshop this afternoon on comms later on today. And I don't think it's quite right in terms of co-commissioned, but in terms of how we access youth offending services and statutory independent advocacy. I don't know if you just wanted to mention anything about that, Aisling.
Yeah, there are a range of partnerships where Cornwall Council, Council of the Isles of Scilly and other statutory agencies like the police and health services all put money into a central pot in order to provide a shared secretariat. So that works for youth offending, it works for advocacy, it works for Safeguarding Adults Board, for Safeguarding Children's Partnership. We've got lots of arrangements like that, but I don't think are necessarily the same thing as some of the other agreements we've talked about, but that works well. It makes sense.
Thank you, Aisling. So if I can go on to the summary slide, Bob. So before you today, members, you've heard from officers. There's more work for us to do in just sort of tweaking and amending the agreements as we go forward. But in terms of my particular view as your head of paid services, I think that this agreement and the performance of the services that we are offered is actually value for money, though there is perhaps Russell might want to comment on how we might need to do some further work on that. I do think, though, that we do need to tighten up on the performance measures I discussed earlier, and I would expect us to have sort of key performance metrics against each of those agreements to be held to account and then reported to full council. As I said, there's been particular improvements, particularly in finance, over the past couple of years, and that's to be welcomed and has got us in a good stead in terms of our budgetary management. There have been some sub-areas of improvement that you've heard a little bit about today as we've gone through, which we'll be working through the steering group with. But in terms of the relationship, particularly as we've gone through COVID, I think that relationship is strengthened and built and is in the spirit of collaboration and mutual aid with a financial and service level issue underneath it. Before I come to the recommendations to conclude, I think Tracy Langley's joined the call, members. Tracy is the Chief Operating Officer for Cornwall Council and is responsible for pretty much all of these services, or particularly in terms of as the sort of lead strategic director responsible for the relationship with the islands. And I didn't know whether you wanted to just introduce yourself and say anything about the agreement from your perspective, Tracy.
Morning, members. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks, Paul. I'm still fairly new in post, although I have been around for a year or so. So I have been getting myself up to speed with all of the agreements that we have between us. And I suppose my role at the County Council is to ensure that the way in which we work right the way across this council, but also with the services that we deliver both internally and externally, and certainly especially for you at the Isle of Scilly, are really high performing and at a reasonable cost, and that you feel that it gives you value. So my intention is to drive a sort of a performance culture, and that sounds a bit managementy speaky, but one of the mechanisms for which we ensure high performing services is to measure it and measure what matters. So that's what I am going to do across certainly our council, and then indirectly through that improvement, you will see that the services that we provide to you as a council should also improve. I suppose by doing that, what I want to do is to concentrate on the delivery of high performance and reducing the cost, certainly through some mechanisms of automation where it's right to do that, but also through our relationship with you, which should concentrate on ensuring that you feel that you've got value and supporting you in being a successful place in your own right. I really support, and I'm really pleased that that Paul has said what he has, because I know that the team at Cornwall Council really care about delivering good service. and they really care about the Isles of Scilly as well. So I'm hoping that you can see that in some of the work that we do with you and for you. I'm really supportive of the improvements that Paul has outlined, and we've been working with Paul to agree on what those might be. And where I want to go with this is to concentrate on performance, but also provide a base for our councils to collaborate on all the big strategic stuff as well, which will make a difference for both of our areas. That's all I wanted to say, Paul. I'm happy to answer any questions, though, if you or your members have any.
Thank you, Tracy. It's good to see you, even if it is virtually.
I will get there one day.
With the last slide,
when I can travel.
Yeah. So these were some of the recommendations that we were putting before members for discussion today. The second is just that members note, the work that we've just been through. The second is, as I said, that any future changes to the agreement, particularly where services are added or taken away or amended, are brought to full council's attention. The third is that we work on a very much clearer position statement above the collaboration agreement, which basically gives the ethos and the culture that we're trying to work together on here, rather than the specifics of SLAs and contract management, etc. And the fourth is just to have a look at that governance, as I said, between the bit that Tracy's just talked about, the performance management of this from a sort of contractual and service point of view, as opposed to the political oversight, both of this and how the two councils work together, and whether that board is still fit for purpose for that. And the fifth, as we've just pushed, is that we want some very much clearer performance metrics against each one of those key service delivery areas that the steering group can then have a meaningful conversation about. So that's it from me, Chairman. Sorry that was a bit of a marathon, but I thought it would just give you the confidence that we've taken a real hard look at all of this to come before you today.
Thank you very much, Paul. Quite a lot to go through. I'd go through the members now to ask any questions either to Paul or Tracy. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you very much.
We'll start with Councillor Sims, please.
Thank you very much for that report, Paul. I have got a question at the end, but I was vice chair from 2014 to 16, and between 2012 and 2016, we went through 4 151 officers, and I used to have quite a lot of conversations with them, trying to find what was wrong. Every time I asked the question, I wished I hadn't, because I didn't understand anything they told me, really. But I got to view that up until 2010, the council basically kept going very well, because the settlement was okay, but essentially there were lots and lots of itsy-bitsy grants that councils got, which they had autonomy to do with what they wanted to, which kept us pretty well flush. And after 2010, they just evaporated. And it suddenly became clear that our systems were not adapted to that new environment. And so then Teo came in right at the beginning of this, really, and the 151 officers were trying to work out how to sort this out, and they were just not able to do it and do the day-to-day running of the finances for the council. And then the collaboration agreement came up, I think we first started discussing it in 2014, and it's been an absolute lifesaver in terms of finance. I mean, I can remember Andy Brown telling us about it, always optimistic, but never cheerful about it, really. But the direction of travel was good. The auditors picked that up. And I suppose 2 years ago, we sort of broke through after the Section 24, and everything's been, I hesitate to say brilliant, but so much better since then. So I'm in terms of finance, I think it's been probably a lifesaver for the council. But the question I have, really, which is not one I have concerns about myself, but I know some of the members do, and I certainly know some of the public do, is the possibility of creep, i.e. Cornwall Council taking us over. Now, I have spoken to the leader of Cornwall Council and others, and the last thing Cornwall Council want to do, quite sensibly, is to take the Isles of Scilly over. But I do think that any assurances we can give other members and the public that this is not the case is a useful thing. So that's essentially my question.
Okay. If I start, and I think Tracy might want to have a comment from her side of the pond as well, is absolutely. That's why I think I wanted the recommendation to you today that any change in this agreement whatsoever would come to the attention of full council. And I think that could then give full council assurance that I'm not changing anything behind your backs without you being fully cited by it all. So I think the number one was the clarity and the transparency of the whole agreement, which is a little bit what today's about as well. And we're quite happy to come back and do these as often as you wish. The second is in terms of creep, as you say it, I wouldn't like to say that there will never be occasions where it is VFM for us to grow the agreement and get Cornwall Council to provide us further services. But that's a mile away from anything that looks like amalgamating councils. There is no agenda to amalgamate the councils from either perspective as far as I can see. I think the only way that would ever happen is if it was imposed by government, and that would be such a incendiary thing to do. I just don't see that that would happen. I think what's more important, though, is your key point there, Steve, which I do agree with, and we're continuing to do with MHCLG, is push for a different funding arrangement for the islands. And I think that's where working with Cornwall through the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Leadership Board and getting a joint voice, which is what happened on the transport funding, is where our voice can be heard much louder in Whitehall. So I can give you my assurance as your Chief Executive. There is no creep towards Cornwall Council taking over the Isles of Scilly, and never will there be. But Tracy, you might want to comment.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Let me reiterate what Paul has said. There is absolutely no agenda whatsoever from a Cornwall Council perspective to merge or anything. We've got enough on our plate, I think. As Paul says, I suppose what I'm interested in is making sure that our relationship is good and strong, and that we're able to support each other, and that mostly in our provision of services to you, that we help and enable you to be as strong and as successful as you can be in your own right. Absolutely, and that's all we're here for.
Yeah, thank you. I can give you a couple of illustrations of what it was like before. We used to have 2 or 3, if you like, consultant accountants coming over every year. I remember a really nice black gentleman. He was an education specialist, and we had various people like that. And they did a good job, and they were very helpful. But once they were gone, then that knowledge base wasn't necessarily there. And accounts are, I imagine, quite difficult even for another accountant to come in and look at if somebody's done it. And so we have that continuity now. And certainly Andy Brown initially and Russell have done a marvellous job. So yeah, I'm all for the collaboration agreement. But again, I'm glad we've got these reassurances about creep, because it is an issue for some, though not for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to start off by saying that I recently had a conversation about library services, and I thought it was very positive feedback, so I'd pass it on. That actually it works so well, the collaboration with Cornwall libraries, that someone was asking, why isn't it like this nationally? It was so positive that they just thought it made such sense, and I think a lot of these services do make a lot of sense. But the concern that I often hear is that skills are being taken away from the islands, and sometimes I don't think that's true, because as the Vice Chair has just said, we were hiring in experts anyway, and now we have teams of experts. I can't remember whether it was Ashton Khan or Nicholas Stinson who said earlier that we're supporting our staff to pursue a master's degree, but that's brilliant. I was wondering about certain areas like IT. Is it possible for us to have, an IT assistant who is employed either by the Council of the Isles of Scilly or Cornwall Council on island, in order to get some skills that are needed locally, but at a lower level, that can provide that instant on-the-ground support when it's needed, but can benefit from being part of a larger organisation.
I think, Chair, I mean, Tom might want to come in as well on that specific point, but in terms of to give some flavour to what you just said, Harry, I totally agree. I think it starts with working with the school in terms of, local government being seen as a career choice that might actually excite people rather than turn them off. Just think of all the services that we provide. I think there's the whole thing around wherever possible we would want to grow our own, and we'd want to have that skill set on the islands. So I'm interested in exploring a number of things. Apprenticeships again. I'm interested in exploring graduate trainee programs, and I'm interested in working with Tracy about secondment opportunities both ways, so that people from Cornwall come to work part-time in the islands and see what it's like to work here, and some of our staff go over to Cornwall Council and work there to see what it's like to work in a big organisation, and therefore to try and get that sort of more understanding of island life from sort of the bottom to the middle to up. We're some way off that yet, but I think we can make progress, as you say, Harry, and that's certainly the sort of agenda that I'm going to try and push. So this agreement is very important in terms of business continuity now, but I wouldn't be against it sort of shrinking where we can have services delivered directly on the island but still linked to overall professional support. So I'm just sort of giving you a flavour of I'm on the same page as you. I think Tom had his hand up, Chairman, if that's all right.
Yes, Tom?
Just to speak to that, basically, Paul, I completely agree. And Harry, agree with you as well. It's something we're looking at all the time. I think, it's unlikely we would completely reverse one of the big arrangements because we get so many advantages out of them. But we are aware of the need. There's an important element of on-island employment to people working for the council on Scilly. We are aware of that. There are just some things where you need someone on hand at all times. And there are just different ways of people developing. Our teams develop here. So sometimes, at any given time, we might have more legal expertise within the Council of the Isles of Scilly. So we might, I could see a point where we would take more legal work inside it. We're not there at the moment, but we are looking at those. And the advantage of having a relationship with a council rather than, say, just a private sector organisation is we're constantly having that conversation with Cornwall, and they're not trying to stop us, if you see what I mean. They want to work with us, and they want us to get value out of it, and we want them to get value out of it as well, because it's a more stable relationship if we're doing that. But absolutely, we do discuss this actually quite frequently, and there's never any pushback.
Thank you. My next point was going to be about sort of experience of living on island. My wife grew up on St Mary's, and when she moved to St Agnes, she suddenly realised just how different living on and off island is. It's the same, if not greater, going from the mainland to living on the islands. And I think we're incredibly lucky to have a senior manager for services to our community who has lived on and off island and has that broad range of experience. I think it's really important for the staff of the council to understand island life, and so it really pleases me to hear what you said, Paul, about having that experience where perhaps mainland council staff, Cornwall council staff could work from Scilly. And I think with COVID measures and more people working from home, it just goes to show what can be done remotely. It sounds very, very positive going forward. Thank you very much. I'll let you move on.
Thank you, Councillor Legg. Councillor Marcus?
Thanks. Thank you. This all sounds good, despite of where the whole agreement kind of came from and members' feeling of opaqueness around the agreement maybe to start with. Totally welcome the governance changes and the especially the audit stuff as well. That'd be really good. I know that Cornwall Council got a bit of hammering for the Oracle Cloud stuff in their audit committee. So we didn't hear, I'd only heard that through the grapevine. So it'd be good for members to be exposed maybe to a bit more of a knockabout forum, where there's a bit more political points being gained, rather than something that's a bit more genteel like our Scrutiny committee. It's interesting to read the history about it. The fact that there's no performance measures is a bit of a shock, really. We need those in, because although we are getting good feedback from our officers, and I trust the officers, I have no quantitative proof that what you're saying is actually true. So it's kind of like turkeys saying that everything's all right in November. So, and one of the questions I always get asked, and not wanting to be kind of, it sort of carries on from Harry's point as well, about it's not just skills on the island, it's about money on the island as well. How much does the agreement cost? How has it delivered savings? Is it value for money taken in the whole round of the Isles of Scilly? In that this money that would have been here is now going to Cornwall. Paul, I don't know if you can answer that.
Well, I did mention it earlier in the fact that, I think it's probably best if Russell comes in and gives his sort of 151 view on the agreement rather than me as a non-financial specialist. What I did say, though, Dan, was I still think there's some work to do on VFM, on the whole thing. So I'm absolutely fine to come back to committee again and maybe have a more focused session on the costs. They were all attached in one of the appendices, but you'll see some of them sort of basically go back to 2018, 17, and just inflation added on, so you can soon lose sight of how much they're actually costing. But the global figures in there as well. But Russell, would you like to comment on VFM, on the whole agreement?
VFM, value for money.
Yeah, I can, Paul. I think you're right. Some of the smaller parts which have been there for a number of years are probably due for a review, just to ensure that they are still value for money. The two relatively newer parts, the two big chunks that were implemented more recently, the IT and the finance ones, were all part of business cases that were put together and vetted by both the LGA in their support and central government in the provision of grants. So I think they went through a fairly rigorous process of ensuring that they were value for money at that point. That still doesn't mean to say that they shouldn't be reviewed, and probably on the third anniversary, which is probably early next year, it would be worth reviewing those to ensure they are still value for money. I think the IT and the finance ones are particularly probably still are. The cost of setting up both those services on the island would be significant. We definitely get the benefits of the economies of scale and the wider teams in Cornwall, and not all of that is charged across. I know that certainly the finance staff take advice from other people in Cornwall on a regular basis in the finance team, and we don't have any intercharging to charge that time across. We just only charge the people that are directly attributable to the Isles of Scilly work. So I think we're still getting value for money there, but it's certainly a piece of work that we do need to look at and how we do review these on an ongoing basis. What I will also pick up from Dan said just now was that in terms of the performance, yes, some of the performance information isn't available, but I would like to point out that in terms of the finance stuff, a lot of the financial performance indicators are actually included in the quarterly finance reports, the debt collection, the level of council tax collections, payment of invoices, etc. And obviously we also include in there the information about getting the statement of accounts produced on time. So a lot of the finance, what I call the true finance performance, is actually within that report, which obviously gives you assurance both on your own financial position, but obviously from some of the performance that Cornwall is providing in providing that finance service.
Yeah, and just to conclude, Chairman, on that, I think Russell makes a good point there, Dan. I wasn't saying there were zero performance measures. What I was saying in terms of the way that we manage the whole agreement, some of it, if you like, has become day job stuff, as Russell's just mentioned. Some of it there are specific measures, and some there aren't. And I just think it all needs to be brought together so it's clear from members that this agreement delivers like this across the board, and how that's held to account and reported to you. So it's an improving, tidying up exercise as opposed to there's nothing there at all.
Yeah, and we started from a pretty low position as well, so it takes time. Yeah, I mean, and just some clarity around the ongoing charges. It's all, I understand this piece of work is really complex, drawing all those bits together, but it would be good in the future to simplify it. And they've done the main bit of work. Simplification could happen quite easily. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
The only, Chairman, if I may, just say one closing point there. The thing, Dan, I think we just need to challenge ourselves about, though, is that there's one thing being clear about the money and the costs and what we're paying for and what we're getting, but we must balance that as well about what we're, in effect, getting in terms of mutual aid, support and business continuity. And some of that, if you like, isn't paid for. It's implicit in the report. And I just think we need to balance those two things when we do a value for money judgment going forward. But I do think the review is timely.
Totally agree, Paul. I mean, it's cost versus value, isn't it? So yeah, that discussion is always an interesting one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the problems of having a surname lower down the alphabet is most of the questions have already been asked. So I very much endorse what's already been said by members. At least my surname doesn't begin with W. Sorry, Steve. I think just as several people were saying, in terms of this information being made public and this review, that's a very, very positive move, and I'd like to see that continuing. In terms of the actual costs of this agreement, I noticed in the report there are costs, and that's actually the first time I recall seeing those costs actually being made public. So that is a good thing, and it's a question that does come up now and again. So I think that trend needs to continue, definitely. A short note on building control. Actually, I think it is something we need to get some feedback on. I can just say as a customer previously of building control, there are issues with kind of communication. I just get the sense they're probably a bit overwhelmed, and it can take quite a long time to get a visit and get communication back. Although what happens is very good, but it just takes a long time sometimes. I think my main point, it goes back to what Paul said around council being seen as a career, and it links back to just what Dan was saying there around jobs. It's clearly a very difficult balance when there are some, there's good reasons why we in effect outsource some jobs to Cornwall Council, such as legal and finance. But clearly there are a significant proportion of very well-paid jobs that are not on Scilly. There's no easy answers to that, but I think strategically that is an issue we need to tackle, because ultimately if we want to keep people here and have decent paid jobs, the council is one of the few employers offering sort of quite well-paid jobs, and that kind of career progression is really important. And actually with, new ways of working, well, perhaps somebody can actually live on Scilly and work full or part-time for Cornwall Council. I don't know. Maybe that's a possibility. So I'd just like to see those issues kind of continually discussed and us being able to move to a position where we can retain greater value in terms of the jobs market on this island, on these islands. Other than that, very much welcome the report. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'll put you first next time. Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As a W, I'm used to going up the rear. First of all,
round next time.
Yeah, okay. Reverse alphabetical order. Something Councillor Sims mentioned earlier reminded me of a comment by previous chairman of the council, Pat Greenlaw, who described Scilly as a group of islands surrounded by consultants. And secondly, I like the line in Paul's summary about the long-standing and beneficial relationship that has existed for many years. I can confirm that with a reference to the two IFCAs, the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authorities. We've had tremendous support in the past from Cornwall IFCA on bylaws, enforcement, legal advice, etc., which is interesting because we are the only two IFCAs in the country that is administered by just one local authority. And going back to Councillor Sims' comment about creep, we did look at one point about a merger, believe it or not, and we did quite a deep analysis of the benefits for both. Cornwall didn't want us, and we didn't want Cornwall. In fact, I remember the chairman of the council, Robert Francis, saying that if we did merge, Mike Hicks would turn over in his grave, previous chairman of the council. And finally, the comment that on Oracle, I did have a couple of questions on that, but again, that has been explained. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. Paul Charnock, is there anything you wish to ask?
Well, yes. It's an issue which I would imagine has already been at least tentatively discussed anyway, but it has connections with the last issue, the last agenda item as well. These are big changes, massive changes. Things are being thrown up in the air, and they're going to hopefully fall down in a better world for service provision, staff, and for the community, and certainly for the community. And it's the word community, which I think is quite essential to get as many people on board as we can at the beginning, rather than trying to fix things and persuade people at the end. Because I think there are one or two experiences of services being moved to Cornwall, South West Water, payment of council tax, etc. Maybe others, where sometimes I've had a little bit of a rough ride, fairly or unfairly. I just think these are people's services, and the response that Steve referred to of creep, I'm sure some people will immediately jump to that without giving too much thought to it, because they don't understand the complexities of health and social care and local authorities. But I would strongly urge that the development, if it's not been started already, development of a communication strategy on this issue be put together quite quickly. That's the end.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Chairman, if I may, thanks, Paul, for that observation. I think that's why I was very clear that this session has been about trying to give some transparency to the agreements that are already in place. They're not shadowy and behind the scenes. They're about, here we are, this is what we're doing. These are the areas we want to improve in, which is mostly around the way we report to members, progress, and hold ourselves to account both on value for money. And I've given a further assurance that in terms of creep, as people keep mentioning, which there isn't any, then if there are any changes to the agreement, then we would discuss them at full council. So I think this session has been all about giving members transparency and confidence that this is not about hiding something. This is about reporting it to members in a public domain with all the papers that people can scrutinise and ask further questions on. I'm sure there'll be other sessions like this to come.
I wasn't suggesting that things were being hidden or there's lack of transparency. It's just selling it to the public. That's the
understood.
That's the thing. That's
understood.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody else got anything to say? They'd like to put their hand up.
Yes, well, if I could just come in again. Steve. I think that it would be useful if this agenda item was added to scrutiny, a scrutiny committee once a year, ideally next autumn, because I think this is something that does need to be just run over, even if it's briefly, on a fairly regular but not too regular basis.
Yes, I would agree with that. Okay. Right, we'll take the recommendations. Recommendation 1, that members note the review of collaboration arrangements with Cornwall Council as set out in the report and the appendices. Recommendation 2, that full council removes the delegation to the chief executive provided by its resolution of the 27th of September 2016. Number 3, that for clarity, an agreed position statement is prepared that outlines the rationale for collaboration, which sits above the overarching collaboration arrangement. Number 4, that the current governance structures in place under the overarching collaboration agreement be reviewed to clarify the role of elected members and the role of officers. And number 5, that agreed performance measures should be put in place for each agreement. Could I take the recommendations all in one, please? And could I have a proposer?
Sure. Sorry, can I just make an amendment? Can we have some timelines, please, for recommendations 3, 4, and 5?
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, this might sound a bit long, but can I say 6 months, Dan? Only that these agreements are not just for us. We also have to work with our Cornwall colleagues as well.
Yeah, sure.
So if you'd accept 6 months, I'm sure I can get it done within 6 months.
Okay. Brilliant.
Could we, does that have to be proposed and seconded to go into the recommendations?
It is your recommendation that you're putting, Chairman, so if we can just be clear where the 6 months comes in, that would be helpful. So
for recommendations 3, 4 and 5.
Yeah, okay. So that can then be...
Okay.
Yeah, so if members agree that, we'll include that in the recommendations, yes.
Right, thank you. All members agreed on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to propose the modified recommendations.
Thank you, Steve. Could I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'll second.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah.
Is there anybody against? We take that as carried then. Thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation, and Tracy as well. Thank you very much. We now go to agenda item 6. The internal audit, please, which is going to be presented by Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sure audit colleagues I can see Neil at the bottom there, and I'm not sure if Jason was joining us as well. But just to introduce internal audit, obviously, because it's their report. This report is obviously block 1. It's backward-looking, Chairman. So as I understand it, this was for audit work that was done prior to February of this year, before we went into lockdown, and was tracking progress of the council's improvement since before that time. In the papers, Chairman, you'll see not only the audit report, risk rated in terms of green, amber, red, and you'll see there's some clear reds in there, and Neil might want to go through those. But I would like just give members assurance. You'll see the management actions that are attached to that as well. Many of those are either well in train, completed, or still on track to be completed. And I'm very hopeful that in the audit work that currently is being carried out, that members will have a much more positive movement of improvement going forward. Just to give you some sort of flavour of that, Chairman, you'll see one of the reds is all around risk management, performance management and business planning. And you'll note not only from an operational management team perspective, but also at full council, there's been much more focus on budget, risk, performance. with things such as also statutory officer reports being brought into play. The whole thing on HR in terms of compliance against staff development reviews, mandatory training, behaviours frameworks, we're all on a massive upward trajectory there from a very low base. My expectation is we're up to 100% by the beginning of next year, and we're well on track for that now. There's been a massive amount of effort by the team, particularly in terms of Tom's area around information governance. And hot off the press, you probably never even heard of it, but there's a shadowy document called the NHS Toolkit, which allows us to share data between us and the NHS. It's incredibly important for all social care work. That's got hundreds of lines of assurance in it, and we've just got 100% compliance on that, which is remarkable. I think we're probably one of the first areas that has had feedback on that, and that's all been done ourselves in collaboration with colleagues in Cornwall. And on that last one, though, I think the one thing I am interested in is document retention, which for me begins to move to document management. And I think that is an area as a management team we want to look more closely at, because I'm not sure that that's an area that we don't need to do a bit of pulling our socks up on. But overall, whilst this is not a particularly rosy-looking report, Chairman, I would like to give you my assurance to you that all of those areas are being actively progressed, and I'm very hopeful that the next audit report you get will have different colours in it.
Let's hope so. Do members want to ask questions now?
Did you want to bring internal audit in, Chairman, because it's their report? I'm
not quite sure who's there.
I think Jason's there, Holly and Neil, I think, Chairman.
Right. Who wants to talk?
Good morning, members. So I thought I'd just introduce myself. Okay, so I thought I'd introduce myself. I'm Holly Sykes, and I'm the head of internal audit who oversees this work for you. So I oversee the work, and then as part of the team, I've got Jason Khan, who is your account manager. So Jason works with all external clients, so we ensure a good separation between Cornwall Council and everyone else. So you get your own unique and a very, very independent service. So I'll hand over to Jason and also to Neil, who undertook the work, and they can take you through it, unless you've got any particular questions for me.
No. We'll listen to the report first. Thank you.
Hello there. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jason Khan. Very pleased to meet you all. I won't be talking much. It'll probably be Neil that's there to answer any questions you have and to briefly run through the report, as Neil was the auditor that undertook all of the work. In terms of going forward, it will be myself and Neil that you see and you'll hear from in terms of providing update reports and liaising with you on the progress of our internal audit plan going forward. But I'd just like to say, we've only been working with you for a relatively short period of time, but I'm very pleased that we've got the opportunity to work with you going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Morning, Neil.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. I will be brief. I've been asked to be brief. And I think I'm going to echo by starting with Paul to say that this was a point-in-time audit that was carried out during a period of significant change. The colour scheme is harsher, perhaps, than the reality. Although I sort of in the area of human resources, which Paul has picked up, there were clearly some significant gaps between what would be expected and what was actually happening on the ground. But I've been reviewing documents recently because I'm currently carrying out an audit, and I've been quite impressed by the change that is being led by your senior officer group in these areas. Just in high-level terms, we covered 7 areas in the first audit, none of which I would say are necessarily ones where the residual risk is ever likely to be particularly low. If you're starting with strategic planning and risk, that is how you organise and run and plan your business. That is always going to be an area where the risk is going to be relatively high because a failure at that end
is likely to cause you significant issues. However, this is an area that was progressing well, but hadn't quite progressed far enough when I did my audit. Since then, having engaged looking at governance, which is one of the areas I'm looking at the moment, I am much more confident in the strategic planning and the way that the organisation is managing itself. There's always areas and opportunities for improvement, but the fact that you've embraced risk management at the top level is great, and it needs to continue to flow down through the organisation. But I was very pleased with where that was going. In terms of the grants area, my biggest concern was about the ability to be able to achieve, the objectives of the grants. I mean, the processes that were in place to manage the grants were actually pretty good. It's just at the time of my audit, nothing was really happening. I mean, it's an engagement issue with the grants, I think, is one of your problems, which leads to this potentially high residual risk that the achievement of the objectives. But I do know from talking to officers that the ability to achieve objectives is very much in their minds, and it is something that they take forward, and the senior manager responsible for that area is on top of that. So I'm sort of comfortable with the progress, but nevertheless, I think there's still a high level of risk with it. Human resources we touched on. I think when I got reviewed that, it was probably a bit of a nadir in its level of compliance, particularly with mandatory training, but that has changed significantly. I've seen statutory officer reports that show that has improved significantly, so I'm very happy with that. The operational services audit was an interesting one because that is something that we don't, auditors don't always get to do. So I was able to go down and not quite get my hands dirty talking to the chaps down in maintenance, but the clear thing for me there is that they are asked to do a hell of a lot and they don't have very much to do it with. And the addition of the fire and rescue service and the airport to that list, particularly with fire having mandatory requirements to keep its vehicles up maintained, has put a lot of pressure on them. And so I think if there's action to improve in those areas to help them, that would be very, very helpful. My review of information governance, it was again very early doors. Tom Walton is now the CIRO for the council. He is taking quite a lot on, and from reviewing his recent statutory officer report, I think if I was to review information governance now, I'd be much more confident, and you would have a slightly better coloured report. It's just one of those things. I think information governance is extremely important. The training had only just been rolled out at that time, so there was areas of non-compliance with that. But that information governance again has a potentially high risk. It's never going to go down too far because of potential failure. I'll link that to retention of documents. As Paul's already mentioned, your document retention policies they weren't really there. And getting hold of the bachelor guidance would be a good start in terms of helping people to understand all that. And then partnerships and delegations, well, there's an awful lot of partnerships and groups that are worked on with the council. I mean, your biggest thing, obviously, at the moment that's on the agenda, has been on your agenda, is the collaboration agreements with Cornwall Council as one of your partners. Again, I think at my time of looking at it, there was a lot changing in that area, which limits the amount of assurance I could provide. I think, again, looking at it now, and obviously you're scrutinising the collaboration arrangements, that is good. But I think there still might be opportunities if you step back to consider whether or not there are, I won't say too many partnership arrangements, but whether or not there could be some consolidation in that space, because that would just make it more efficient. Because you get the same people turning up to multiple meetings, as I'm sure you understand. So if you could consolidate meetings, you might find yourselves with a more efficient process. But it by no means does that imply that there are problems. It's just I think there are opportunities for doing it differently. So that was essentially a very whistle-stop tour through the work. I mean, like I say, I'm engaged in a lot of areas at the moment, and as Paul has mentioned, it will be probably some different colours. This work is going very well. The officers have been very helpful. There's been considerable progress. So I'm sort of confident as we continue with this work, we will find we're giving you more assurance over some of these control areas.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Right, questions from members. Councillor Sims.
I haven't really got any specific questions on this. I'm looking forward to the more current one, which will, I think, emerge nearer the end of the year. And I think that will tell us a little bit more, because you have highlighted that, obviously we're talking about the one that came out in February, but you're alluding to what the current situation is, and I think that'd be more useful to examine that properly at the time. But I'm very encouraged that you've seen quite a lot of improvement. Quite actually, if anything, I would say that your view is perhaps a little bit rosier than mine, which is interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. Right, we'll go to Councillor Watt now. We'll try that one. Try it the other way around.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Again, like Councillor Sims, no serious questions. I will point out about human resources, though. I go back to several years ago. Well, in fact, probably 20 years ago, when the chief executive at the time gave me the role of human resources, and the only training I had was half a day in County Hall, and that was it. Totally insufficient. I hated the job, and I passed it on as quickly as possible. So it's good to see that those two red splits in the two columns will change in the future. I think that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Watt. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, again, I mean, obviously keen to see the next report. Just wanted to pick up on a couple of things, though. It seems to me some of the findings around training and maybe you seem to say there might be a kind of systemic issue, a cultural issue, perhaps, around training. I mean, I know it's changed a bit, but I don't know if you wanted to just comment on that a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's one of those areas, I think, and Paul will probably have a view on it because he's now been digging into it. He's made it quite a priority. So when I was looking at it, the levels of compliance, it was from the top down. So there were certain parts of the business where if senior officers and senior managers were compliant, then the people below them would be compliant. In other areas, it was less so. And it just meant that in certain areas you had big gaps in what I would consider to be important mandatory training, given that as an organisation, the Council of the Isles of Scilly is in the public eye all the time, more or less. I would presume. I mean, I think most officers must feel like they're almost never off duty, and as a member group, you too are also always under observation. So I think in these sorts of areas, that to me was a compelling case for ensuring that these things happen, but it wasn't necessarily, I think, what people were taking on board, because they have so many other priorities. Then you kind of, training always slips. But the thing about mandatory training is it's mandatory for a reason. Sure. So I mean, it's. I mean, I could say the same of Cornwall Council. We've had cultural issues with training. We still do. It's not uncommon, but I think it's just I felt it was a proportionately larger issue for you, given your sort of circumstances.
I think, Councillor Smith, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, for me, I make no judgment about why we got to where we got to. That's not for me to comment on, but I just wanted you to know that from my perspective as your chief executive, then I expect number one, in terms of being a leader of the organisation, then you should do what you're asking other people to do. So my number one priority was I did my mandatory training. Number two is I've completed my PDSs for all my direct line reports. And I think, as Neil says, it begins to cascade down that this is important. But I think the key point mustn't lose sight of. Performance development reviews are so important because it's the occasion to talk about the performance, the aspirations, the skills, the hopes, the fears of all of the staff, to have that quality conversation at least once a year with their line manager, in order that they are thanked for what they're doing, most importantly, but also have a career path or an understanding of where they need to improve. And secondly, if it's going to be mandatory training, either we don't have any or we do. And if we do have mandatory training, the clue's in the word, it's mandatory. So otherwise, what's the point? So I think it's been a tidying up exercise, and it's an example of where we as your senior leaders need to be held to account to do what we expect all the other staff to do as well.
No, it's a fair comment and good to hear. And also, training should be seen as a positive thing, not a must do. Yeah, very much so. Okay, that's good. A couple of questions specifically for Neil. One was just on information governance. Just wanted to check whether there's any evidence of non-compliance or data breaches.
Not yet.
No, that's good. Okay.
Sorry, the classic auditor caveat. I haven't seen any, but I'm going to be talking to Tom Walton later today to follow up on some of the IG points. So.
I'd expect no less. And just on grants, interesting comment there. So I know we've had issues with grants in the past, and it is an ongoing issue. I understand that. But your comment there is that the processes are sound. If that's the case, why is the risk still high?
There's two reasons. One was at the time of the audit, there hadn't been a lot of grant activity in the areas. Because I looked at the Go EV project, bees, and the voucher scheme. At that time, those projects were still pretty much in the early stages of implementation, which, from my perspective, thinking about the achievement of the objectives of a project, risk is going to be higher because the further away you are, the likelihood of success is, there's always greater risk. And for me as well, I think one of the issues was that on things like bees and the voucher scheme, there wasn't a lot of take-up at the time, despite the best efforts. So there was robust processes in place to review and vet, and I was very confident that the process as was managed was there. The only issue was whether or not they were actually going to get enough people through the door. Now, when I think about the risk there, the risk is perhaps to the benefit to the people of Scilly, and potentially the council having to either not. There was some risk of staff costs not being recovered as part of the grant if things weren't achieved. But it was more about the potential impact it would have on the council in terms of the reputation, the benefit to the islands, and the overall sort of impact that these would have. I mean, I think with some of these projects as well, the Go EV project is quite ambitious, which actually increases its risk as well. And I think you've seen these things going on. But I think, Councillor Smith, it's a point in time issue. When I looked at it, I felt there was still so long to go that there was still that significant achievement, that significant risk of failure to achieve. I think that's changing, and it will be one of those areas that, with proper leadership and management and engagement with the grant providers, that some of that risk will be managed. So I'm less. I think if I was to look at it now, it's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, we'll certainly look forward to seeing what you've got to say in your next report. And Go EV and bees are in my areas as lead member. I know I have, a good degree of confidence in those. So, yeah, look forward to your next report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Marcus.
Thank you. God, this is really bad. Reds and oranges. Well, reds are really bad. Obviously, it's really good to hear about a new culture change and new opportunities and new importance placed on mandatory training. I can't really believe what I'm reading in some of it, to be honest. The fact that on page 219 it reads to me that senior officers haven't even done mandatory training. I'm glad to hear that that's now been resolved. And I just wanted to mention page 213 as well about the contract and the signature. I would hope that some kind of investigation has been done on this, that it's not going to happen again, and that there will be some resolution on this. I guess, Paul, that's a question for you.
Yeah, in terms of your first point, Dan, as I come to, and I'm not going to go into any more, I mean, this was an audit report that was in February going backwards. All I can say is what I've done since I've joined you as an organisation and where I think we are now. So proof of the pudding will be in your next audit report, and then that's the one that you can, in effect, hold me to account for in terms of what I've been doing since I've joined your organisation to deal with some of these issues. All I can say is that I have had focus on those, and I hope that there will be a more positive report coming before you hopefully before the winter. I think, to back up the staff, though, there has priorities are set from the top, both from yourselves and also from me as the head of paid service. And whether there was or wasn't enough focus on it, I can't judge, but there is now. And that's the only assurance I can give you on that. The bit about contracts, yes, absolutely, we'll look into making sure that those sorts of things don't happen again. And also Stephen Taylor, our Deputy MO, is particularly looking at all the issues around governance and sign-off in terms of how we manage the authority in a sort of safe and robust way. So that's part of Stephen's improvement programme for the council going forward. But on that particular case, yes, I'm quite happy to report back to members on how it came about and what we did about it.
Just from an audit perspective and in general principles, I'm not a fan of people retaining exact copies of their signatures in electronic form like that, because it does expose you to risk. I've mentioned it to previous monitoring officers at Cornwall Council, because it's essentially a license, for people to use or misuse your signature. So if you do want to sign off things in an informal way, don't use your actual signature. Is a general recommendation from me, with my information governance hat on as well. But yeah, in this instance, there's been no negative impact on the council, but it is a factor, I think, and it is something that we just, as your information governance engages more, things like this will get picked up alongside what the monitoring officer is doing. So I would have increasing confidence that these risks can be avoided. But there's always the human element needs to be taken into account. This is one of those situations where I think it may have been done for expediency. It was signed off by another senior officer, but when you get the comment from the chap standing next to you, well, I don't remember signing that, it does ring alarm bells.
Definitely. There is the good thing about bad audits is there's always a journey to go on, and there's always hopefully a positive end to it. And in terms of mandatory training, I think it'd be really good to get more mandatory training from members, especially when the start of the new cycle, because it is not mandatory for some of them. And then if we talk about taking the lead from the top, then that is taking it from that level would be much better for everyone as well, really. That's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Councillor Legg.
Obviously, great to hear that we're headed in the right direction. Now, I know you can't comment on what you didn't look at, but just thinking about the fact that this is so red and amber across the board, how do we know that doesn't spread into other areas and that the direction of travel isn't happening in those areas? I mean, is there anything that you could speak to about that, Paul?
I think it was a little bit, as Russell mentioned in the previous report, Councillor Legg. I think what you've inherited in your internal audit work programme, in effect, was sort of like, and I'm probably being rude and Neil might tell me off here, in terms of skimming the surface, as opposed to having the time to do quality in-depth audits. And if you heard what Russell was saying, so because Russell has been working with internal audit and I have as well about their work programme going forward, is we want them to add much more value to the organisation by having great in-depth audits in areas of key risk. So no surprises to you, Harry. Number one on my list of an internal audit look is asset management and facilities management. Number one. What we don't want them to waste their time on, which is what Russell and I have agreed, is where we have external audits from other inspection agencies. What's the point of having internal audit look at fire and rescue when we've got the HMI coming in? What's the point if we've got Ofsted coming in or CQC? So we've tried to minimise some of those going forward, which in my view are double-handed, and focus on those areas of risk which you will recognise as a member, facilities management being, number one in my book. And the other thing which I referred to earlier, and this is a work in progress, and Holly might want to comment about how this may or may not work, is I'm really keen that where internal audit are doing internal audits in Cornwall, relating to services that we procure from Cornwall, then wouldn't it be sensible if those findings are shared with us in a way that, in effect, we're getting double bang for our bucks? Why would I want an internal, pay internal audit time to look at something, say, I don't know, patching of IT systems, when actually Cornwall's doing that itself? So I think we can get even better bang for our bucks and even more assurance from audit when they are auditing Cornwall Council services that we pay for and use as well.
Yes, so we spoke about that the other day, Paul, and we're going through the programme at the moment to see where we can get that alignment, because the assurance is being done, so absolutely it's worth sharing and getting that economy of scale.
And if I may, Councillor, I'll also just add that the work I'm currently doing, which includes corporate governance, so tone at the top, the way the organisation is managed, is giving me, that would give me a high degree of assurance. Well, I won't say high degree. It's giving me a degree of assurance over the way that the organisation is run. And if the organisation is run effectively, the risk of ongoing or failures lower down is mitigated to some extent. So I can't give you an opinion on anything I didn't audit, but what I can say is environmentally, the way that the council is setting itself at the moment is putting it on a sound footing to help minimise the risk of failure further down. And I think Paul has identified asset management as one of those areas. I think it's important. It's important for most of the local authorities at the moment because we've probably got, in some areas, too many assets. But I would say that, the work I'm doing at the moment is also taking account of our ongoing work on the Oracle systems at Cornwall Council. So I'm looking at AP and AR, for example, accounts payable and accounts receivable. I don't need to test your system because I know it works. The element is, though, of course, the piece that needs to be looked at is what is manually input. So what are people inputting onto the system? Because the system works. So that's an area where we can already take reliance. And the underlying IT environment, we also take reliance upon because that is something that we know works, and we know that the reporting process around Oracle, although it's got a few teething problems at the minute, is also generally reasonable once it's in place. So I think there's a lot to be said. Going forward, you'll probably get more of a view on that because the areas that we looked at in the previous audits didn't really cover too much of that, although because you've got your own arrangements in place in all those sorts of areas. So we will see more linkage between us and them. And I'm planning on including, because I run our continuous auditing at Cornwall Council, so I'm planning on including all your transactions. So APAR and payroll will go into our quarterly testing, so we'll be getting some output on that. That will be exception reporting, so it'll only ever be the bad stuff that gets reported. But if I don't report, that means it's all fine. So,
thank you. Chair, I see Tom Bolton has his hand up. I don't know if that's related to this.
Oh, right. That's all right. I can't see that. Tom?
Thanks, Chairman. It was just to make one other general point to provide assurance going forward, which is that obviously members approved some changes to democratic and corporate, and one of those was to bring human resources into this department, but also to bring some of the other elements that were maybe distributed around the council, like the CIRO role now sits within the department, along with greater information governance support on CILI. As I said earlier, it's always been really good from Cornwall's side, but it needs to integrate with something at this end. And I think the general structure of the democratic and corporate team is it's already obvious that that's enabling us to put in place some of the things that Paul's super eager to get on track with, PDPs, manager training, etc. It's just easier for us to arrange ourselves locally to achieve what Paul wants to put in place. So I think that's another area of assurance where from March onwards it just structurally looks different, as well as the added impetus of Paul's just much greater focus on that kind of thing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. There's a lot of answer to that question. Perhaps more than I bargained for, but thank you very much for taking it in depth.
Thank you, Councillor Legg. Has anybody else got any questions? No.
Chairman, I was just going to add, just that I think the process of internal audit is really valuable. I think it challenges us in a positive way, and also pleased to hear Paul's responses to this, because it's really, really important that we take these recommendations on and try to make continuous improvements. So, really endorse the process and look forward to the next report, which, out of interest, when's that report likely to come to us?
Well, I'm expecting to complete the report this month.
Great.
I've got a range of meetings this week with officers to sort of summarise findings. Like I say, I mean, there's going to be a different colour scheme on this one.
Good.
To summarise findings, and I would just sort of emphasise the point that red is not necessarily bad. It just means you've got to do something. But you know, when you see red, everybody gets worried. But yeah, it just means you've got things to do. So yeah, I'm hoping to get a report out. I'll be talking to Russell later this week as well to sort of summarise what we're doing. It's not going to be. We're covering 6 areas in this report. I think it is. No, 5. Sorry. And it won't. I'm not expecting, based upon my work to date, for it to be significantly contentious or requiring lots of clarification. So I'm hoping then we should be able to get it through for November. Good to hear. Okay. And then we might have some more work for you before the end of the year as well.
Oh, good.
And Chairman, if you're looking for a proposer, I'm happy to propose
recommendations. Right.
Chairman, can I just say, forgive me for being cup half full for cup half empty. I know that isn't always the case with myself and colleagues, but the recommendation is that members note the interim audit findings, etc. You may wish to welcome the promising prospects for improvement as well, rather than just note. I'll leave it to you.
I'm happy to second the proposal for NOTAM and propose that we welcome the improvements.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation.
Have you got that, Andy?
Sorry, I do. I've got a lag when I press on mute. Sorry about that, Chairman. I have got that. Yeah.
Yeah, you have got that. Right. So we have a proposer for the recommendation. Councillor Smith. Do we have a seconder, please? Was it Councillor Legg?
Yes, I second that proposal.
Right. Is there anybody against? No, that's carried then. Right. There's nothing in part 2. So we've come to the end of the meeting, and thank you all very much for coming, and especially the ones from across the water.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bob, can you stay on?